Hi guys, back again. Okay, so today I want to talk about commodification. Commodification is the process of turning goods or services into things that can be bought and sold into commodities. And the text that we're going to use as our jumping off point, or that we're going to use to generate some ideas about commodification, is Michael Sandel's essay, What Isn't for Sale, which was published in. So Sandel starts off the essay by kind of listing a bunch of things that are sort of intuitively creepy or shocking to sell, but which are actually for sale in places around the United States and, for that matter, internationally today. So he gives examples like selling advertising space on your body, selling the rights to hunt endangered species, selling upgraded jail cells. Oh, that door opened. Selling citizenship. So there's something that might rub you, or maybe there are a few things that might rub you the wrong way about some of these commodities, about turning these sorts of things into commodities. But it isn't necessarily obvious either A, that it's wrong to turn these things into commodities, or B, if something rubs you the wrong way, what is it that rubs you the wrong way? What's wrong about it? So Sandel ultimately gives an answer to this question, but let's take a little detour, or follow him on his little detour, and then come to his answer. So Sandel distinguishes between what he calls market economies and market societies. Okay, so market economies are economies that use markets to distribute certain goods and resources. So, if you want to get your hands on some fish in the United States today, well, there are a couple of different ways of doing it. You can go fish yourself, or if you have food stamps or some kind of government assistance, you might be able to get fish through non-market means without paying money. But the main way most people get fish, most of the time anyway, is to go buy it at a store. So there's a market economy for fish in the United States. Market societies are different, though. Market societies, in Sandel's phrase, are societies where everything, more or less, is up for sale. It's not just fish, it's stuff from the list that he gave at the beginning. Advertising space on your body and stuff like that. So Sandel's problem is with market societies, not with market economies. He's a fan of market economies, not a fan of market societies. Okay. Part of the criticism he has of market societies is in terms of a sort of connection between market society and the financial crash of 2007, 2008, which we're still living in the aftermath of. It's not entirely clear what the connection is supposed to be between the idea of a market society and the financial crisis. But I think what he's getting at is sort of two things. First, that the growth of the market society in the United States since the Reagan administration in the 80s has kind of come with a faith that markets will regulate themselves and can be used to solve all of our problems. So, if we had a problem with public housing, for example, in the heyday of public housing, oh well, the solution is to just get rid of public housing, make housing a free market, and government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. Okay, and that sort of general antipathy to regulation led to the increasingly risky financial speculation, which and deregulation of financial markets, which helped cause the financial crisis of 2008. I think that's part of the connection he's probably getting at. I think also part of the connection he might be getting at, and this is an idea which I think came up when we were talking about Enron, is that the financial crisis depended on the development of these really weird markets where people were buying, mortgage-backed securities, these sorts of bets on and derivatives from them. So on sort of huge chunks of housing debt, nobody really understood what these what these bets meant. That's something that happens with in the sort of finance industry, is that the financial instruments which people buy and sell become increasingly complex, increasingly abstract, increasingly removed from the real material economy of people interacting with each other and making stuff and doing stuff for each other. So the financial crisis happened in part because people didn't really realize what they were doing in trading on these weird financial instruments. And so, you might have argued, those financial instruments should never have been for sale in the first place. So, a market society where everything is up for sale, where any new weird financial instrument that you can dream up, no matter how removed from the material economy, there can be a market for that. And so, this might be a way of drawing the connection between the idea of a market society and the financial crisis of 2008. Okay, so what are Sandel's problems with market society? Well, it's one problem is that it's led to it played some role, he claims, in the with some reason it played some role in the financial crisis of 2008. But then he gives sort of two more specific or precise or getting to the heart of the matter criticisms of market societies. He says, one criticism is that market societies lead to increases in inequality. So if everything is for sale, then the difference between the rich and the poor will grow. Let's take something which is a good or service which is not primarily provided by markets in the United States. Take roads, okay? So roads are a public good. There are such things as private roads to people's houses, stuff like that. But most of the roads in the United States are publicly owned. And this is a good thing because roads aren't just for one person to use. We all use the roads. And even if you're not using the roads right now, you benefit from other people using the roads. Even if I don't go for a drive today or don't leave the house today, I benefit because people are able to, for example, truck groceries to my local grocery store and stuff like that. Importantly, even if you're poor, you have access to roads that are paid for by the government. You don't have to be rich to use the roads because they are not for sale. They're provided by the government. But if roads were privatized, if the creation and maintenance of roads was entirely for sale in the private market, poor people wouldn't have access to roads. So in general, when some good or service is provided entirely or primarily by market, then poor people are not going to have access to it. So if we provided roads entirely through the market and poor people can't afford the roads, well then, too bad for poor people. And so, so this can help us distinguish, Sandel says, between the sorts of things that we might want to have for sale and the things that we don't want to have for sale. The things that we want to have for sale are things that sort of lead to forms of inequality that we can tolerate, and things that we don't want to have for sale are things that lead to forms of inequality that we don't tolerate or won't tolerate. So then the question becomes, and this is the big question, which Sandel understandably doesn't go into in depth in this piece because it's a short piece. What sorts of inequality can we tolerate? Um, uh, Presumably it's okay for yachts to be bought and sold, right? For yachts to be provided primarily by markets, because it's okay if poor people don't have access to yachts. Maybe nobody should have access to yachts. That's another question. But there doesn't seem to be sort of intolerable inequality involved in yachts, because yachts aren't things that you sort of need to live. They're not things that provide some very basic, necessary kind of value in life or something like that. What about other things? So what about inequality in internet access? Maybe you think, well, right now in the United States, internet access is primarily provided for, at least at your home, by the market. And so people who can't afford internet access at home don't get it. Is that a type of inequality that we're willing to live with? What about inequality in access to healthcare? What about inequality in access to housing? Um, the, I think one, I think Sandel might kind of underplay how radical the argument is that he's making. If the thought is that whenever we provide some good or service in a society, primarily through markets, it is going to deprive poor people of that good. It's going to restrict poor people's access to that good. Then we are maybe then Sandel is suggesting we don't want to provide some good or service primarily through the market if we are not okay with poor people not having it. But housing is a market. I mean, it's not a free market. It's very, very highly regulated in the United States, but for all sorts of reasons, maybe some good, maybe some not so good. But but it's provided primarily by markets. You might say, well, is that something? Does Sandel's argument entail that housing, apartments and houses shouldn't be bought or sold? Well, does that go too far? You might be radical enough. I know plenty of people who are, or maybe I am myself, to say, yeah, actually, houses shouldn't be bought or sold. But that's a very radical conclusion, right? Okay, it's no longer just talking about really extreme or bizarre stuff like buying and selling access to upgraded jail cells or citizenship or something like that. Okay. So to sum up, one criticism of market society is that when a good or service is primarily provided for by the market, poor people won't have access to that good or service, and this might lead to a form of inequality. If the good or service is a really important one, this will lead to a form of inequality that we can't tolerate in a society. But one question that you want to ask here is, well, how wide-ranging if we really accept this argument, and maybe we should, how wide-ranging, how radical are its consequences? And if you don't accept these radical consequences, well, how do you respond? Do you say, oh, well, we need some sort of mixed economy where housing is provided for by the market for people who can afford it, and it's provided for by vouchers or public housing for people who can't? Well, that runs into its own problems, because if you have a social service which is only for poor people, then it's sort of generally going to be deprecated and stigmatized in the way that welfare and public housing have been stigmatized in the past. So, so maybe those sorts of mixed economies or mixes of markets and social welfare programs to provision services generally don't work very well. Okay, so we've got a problem on our hands, and I'm not going to tell you what the solution is. although I have my own views about this. Another problem that that Sandel raises is I think really interesting, really provocative. So he uses the word corruption to describe this second problem with market society, but not corruption in the sense of like a government official who's takes a lot of bribes or has a lot of conflicts of interest or something like that. Corruption for Sandel here has something to do with how we value a good or service. So he says that assigning a dollar value to something encourages us to appreciate it in a certain way. And sometimes it's not a good idea to appreciate things in this way. So selling advertising space on a person's forehead encourages us to value that forehead the way that we would value a billboard. But, people aren't billboards, and we shouldn't value people or their bodies the way that we value billboards. Similarly, paying children to read, you might think, encourages them to value books for profit rather than because books are cool or funny or educational or thought-provoking or whatever. Psychologists sometimes distinguish between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is when you want to do something sort of for its own sake. You want to read the book because it's just pleasurable or gives you things that you value just all by itself. You're extrinsically motivated if you're motivated by some sort of hope of a separated future reward. Oh, you read the book. I read some technical manual, for example, not because I find it really interesting, but because I want to learn how to do whatever the technical manual teaches me how to do. I want to fix my car or something like that. Okay, so when things that should be, so Sandel is saying that sometimes things that should be sort of intrinsically motivated, so people should be intrinsically motivated to read books, they are instead extrinsically motivated. They're motivated by the hope of money or some future reward for reading the book. Okay, so they're reading the book in order to do something else, in order to get something else. Okay, so I think it's worth noting that psychologists say that, well, you might think, well, who cares whether you're intrinsically or extrinsically motivated to do something? One reason is that psychologists tell us that there's some evidence that if people are extrinsically motivated to do something, their sort of habit of doing it is a little bit more fragile. So if you're only extrinsically motivated and then that extrinsic motivation disappears, people no longer pay you to read, then you're going to stop reading. And if we want people to read, we don't want we want people to have durable, firm habits of reading, for example. We don't want them to be extrinsically motivated to read. We want them to be intrinsically motivated. Okay. Just like the last critique of market societies, or sort of problem with market societies that Sandel kind of diagnoses, though, we might wonder whether this critique goes farther than Sandel has asked, and perhaps whether it's gone too far. So when we were talking about inequality, we asked, does this go farther than Sandel asked? Does it involve, if we buy this argument, should we decommodify, take things out of the market that are sort of necessary to survival? That would include housing, healthcare, food, and so forth. If so, does that mean something is wrong with Sandel's argument, or does that mean that we should just have more radical beliefs about housing and food and healthcare and so on? In this case, we might ask, does the argument go farther than Sandel suggests? So if one of the problems with paying children to read is that it gets children to be extrinsically motivated to do something that should be intrinsically motivating, then you might wonder, does this mean that we should never pay people for doing things that are intrinsically valuable? I wonder about that. If um, if sex is intrinsically valuable, does this mean that we should never pay people for sex? If taking care of your friends is intrinsically valuable, does this mean we should never pay people for taking care of us? It's not clear to me. Again, maybe we are yeah. Actually, I'll just leave it there. It's not clear to me. So Sandel's argument might lead to the conclusion that we should never pay people for things that they should be sort of intrinsically motivated to do, things that they should find valuable in themselves, rather than for valuable for some external reward or some as valuable as a means to an end. Okay. So that's it. I think we're not going to answer these questions completely today, but I think Sandel can help us kind of get started in thinking about what sorts of values might be involved in questions about commodification, and if we take those values seriously, do they suggest sort of minor or cosmetic or relatively small changes to our society, or would they suggest really, really radical changes? And if so, does that mean we need to revise our values, or does that mean we need to revise our society? On that note, we will pick up next time. I'd like to talk about meaningful work for next time, so I'll send out the link to the reading there. Okay. Thanks again for tuning in. Hope you're all staying safe. As usual, send me an email if you want to talk about this stuff, or if you have any questions or want to bounce ideas off me. Okay. Thanks. Bye.